Good morning. I am Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, and you could almost hear the cavalry bugle playing that help is on his way. When you look at these organizations who have joined Norman Siegel and I on this initiative, they have spent countless number of years and hours in hearing the complaints, and we cannot thank them enough when the entire city and government appear to have turned their ears away from the complaints and calls. These organizations have really stayed on the ground and remain committed to housing. And we say over and over again that housing is more than four walls. You know, it's the precursor that allows Americans to sleep, to experience the American dream. And it has been a nightmare for so many families. And so I'm happy and thankful that when I reached out to Norman Siegel, who is just always willing to fight on the side of the underdog, we called him and sat down and met with him and said, how do we do something on the ground in a very real way to stop this horrific condition of displacement, of harassment, of intimidation, and in some cases of criminal behavior that is going unnoticed and unprosecuted. And so we are happy to be joined by a list of tenant advocate partners. Many of them I have seen on the field of battle of protecting our housing stock. And I just want to list some of and name some of the partners we have in this initiative. Association for Neighborhood Housing and Development, Brooklyn Neighborhood Improvement Association, Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation, Carroll Gardens Association, Flatbush Development Corporation, Fifth Avenue Committee, Lasaurus Community Development Corporation, Midwood Development Corporation, Neighborhood Housing Services of Bedford-Stuyvesant, Neighborhood Helping Neighbors, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, St. Nick Alliance, Tenants and Neighbors, Urban Justice Centers. These are the all-star members of fighting housing every day, and we can't thank them enough. We're going to do our part in government to move this issue forward. We're announcing today a series of town halls to investigate cases of tenant harassment throughout Brooklyn. Predatory landlords that are playing games with the health and safety of their tenants, denying sometimes heat, hot water, sanitation, or other basic services. This is not a negotiation tactic, and it's not a game. Tenant harassment complaints in housing court has doubled since 2011. And immediate action is needed to slow down that pace. Incidents of harassment include landlords operating without proper permits, shutting off utilities, construction projects operating in violation of orders to stop the project, landlords who openly ignore requirements for tenants' order protection plans in order to contain the spread of lead or asbestos, which may be exposed during renovations. These are just a small number of some of the complaints that we are receiving daily. Since I have taken office, I have spoken with advocates, elected officials, and everyday Brooklynites about the need to criminally prosecute predatory landlords who treat fines as the cost of doing business. Landlords are laughing at these fines and they are ignoring them. And if we don't start ensuring that we criminally prosecute landlords who are harassing, displacing, destroying property, and removing tenants, then they're going to continue to laugh at our justice system. And so those areas where there's criminal behavior, our district attorneys, we're calling on them to organize together and put together a task force that will go after those landlords that are committing criminal actions. We commend District Attorney Thompson for what he did with one landlord that had a history of damaging property, but the problem is larger than one landlord. There must be a perp walk of landlords who are breaking crime, who are committing crime to displaced tenants. Tenants need to know their rights, and governments needs to advance these rights, especially when these actions deal with health and safety issues. I am announcing a series of these hearings with Civil Rights Attorney Norman Siegel to go after and find and retrieve the information so we can determine if there's an opportunity for some form of civil action. Town halls are scheduled to be held on Tuesday, July 14th at Brooklyn Borough Hall, Thursday, July 16th at Woodhall Medical Center, and Tuesday, July 28th at SUNY Downstate Center. When we identify cases where criminality is at play, we're going to turn it over to the district attorney's office. Where there are cases that may involve civil liability, we're going to coordinate with a legal team that includes Mr. Siegel to explore the possibilities of a lawsuit. We're going to reach out to some of our other volunteer legal services to see if they will partner in this initiative as well. Bad actors that continue to think fines is a course of doing business. This is not what we're going to do in the borough of Brooklyn, and we're hoping this initiative becomes citywide, because one thing all the boroughs have in common is the harassment and displacement of tenants. Additionally, we are calling on all the district attorneys to join us in this initiative to ensure that we move forward in identifying these landlords. We know that all landlords don't fall into the category of bad actors, but too many bad actors are falling into the category that they're getting away with what they're doing. And we want to identify them, and we want them to be held to a strict law enforcement or civil penalties that are involved. And it is our goal to take this head on. Brooklyn is going to be aggressive in fighting to ensure that this hemorrhaging of affordable apartments, this hemorrhaging of good New Yorkers that are being harassed is going to stop. And the way we believe we can stop it is seeking out the information, allowing everyday tenants to know they are not alone in the pursuit to retain and hold on to their housing. And so I want to thank all of the advocates that have continued to be on the front line in fighting this fight. And I want to particularly thank Norman Siegel for assisting us in taking upon this important initiative that impacts all of our housing residents in the city of New York in general, and particularly in the borough of Brooklyn. Now I want to turn it over to my good friend, civil rights attorney Norman Siegel.
Thank you, Borough President. It's an honor to be here, especially with these advocates, and especially my long-term friend, Marty Needleman, who does a great job in providing legal services for the indigent. We are here today, as the Borough President stated, to announce town hall meetings to have landlords and tenants give testimony regarding the practices of landlords vis-a-vis the tenants. Town hall meetings give us the opportunity to discover what is actually happening to tenants. This is especially crucial these days as gentrification dramatically increases and spreads, with the result that tenants are being forced out of their apartments in numerous neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I want to commend the Daily News, the slip of the word. There's sometimes that editorials I want to condemn them, but today particularly thank the Daily News for its two-page spread today, exactly on this issue, showing what happens in certain neighborhoods in the city with regard to the dramatic increase in rents, especially for low-income people. We want to hear from the tenants, specifically what the landlords are doing to them. And also, we're not excluding the landlords from coming to testify. There could be, my experience in legal services at MFY Legal Services for 7 years when I was the director, is that sometimes there are landlords who are doing the right thing, and we'd like them to come and tell us how they are taking steps in order to preserve affordable housing. We do not want to stereotype anyone in this process. We have heard stories, as the Borough President has said, where landlords have destroyed their own buildings with tenants living in them, how they harass or threaten tenants in order to quickly and forcibly vacate their properties, and finally, to cut basic services to force the tenants to leave. Now, why do they do this? They do it to renovate the vacated building, to remove the apartments from rent regulation, and then rent the apartments to those who can pay 3 or 4 times more, or sell the building at an increased market rate, or even demolish the building and build a new building and then sell condos for $1 million. Consequently, we need to answer the following questions at these town halls. Are these stories that I just mentioned true? Are these stories isolated? Are these stories widespread? And if so, who specifically is engaging in these egregious practices? And most important, can something be done to stop these practices? And finally, can something be done to hold these landlords civilly and criminally accountable? One last point. Tenants do have rights. The tenants have, in a very brief statement, have the following actions and remedies: unlawful and constructive evictions, a breach of habitability. That means the landlord's contractual promise to the tenant that the rented apartment will be safe and habitable, a very strong weapon in this fight. And finally, unjust enrichment, where landlords receive money or benefit at the expense of tenants. Now, this leads to the following damages, which we will pursue vigorously, as the Borough President has said. 1, a rent abatement. 2, compensatory damages. 3, emotional distress. And finally, punitive damages. Also, under the real property law, if there's an unlawful eviction and there's intent, there could be triple damages. Possible criminal charges, criminal mischief, where property wrongfully is damaged, and depending on the facts, harassment, intimidation, and fraud. So to all those landlords and tenants that are out there listening, or read the papers, or see the TV or radio tomorrow, you should be put on notice. Notice that the Borough President and the advocates here in Brooklyn are very serious about these town hall meetings and the issues of tenant harassment and illegal actions by landlords. So come, participate in what democracy is all about, which is what town hall meetings are about, and tell us what is happening so we can systemically and effectively hold people accountable for their actions. I look forward to these hearings. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the advocates here, and especially the people who will be coming to the hearings. Thank you, Borough President.
Thank you very much. And we want to hear from some of the advocates, Mr. Needleman, and any other advocate that want to talk about some of the inputs that you're seeing for some of the tenants that are coming in. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Marty Needleman. I'm the co-executive director at Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation A. We serve North and East Brooklyn. And we've been doing this for a long time. Unfortunately, the destructive behavior by landlords is not a new phenomenon. We've been doing it and seen it for a long, long time. We really deeply appreciate the Borough President's participation in making the reality apparent to the world. These are not landlord-tenant cases. These are criminal cases. And landlords' criminal behavior has to be treated as criminal behavior, not as a landlord-tenant case. And what I tell my law student interns when they come every summer is that they don't learn this in law school, but the law is what you can get away with. And the other part of this is no cops, no law. And we have historically been the cops, but it's good to have a real cop on our side and participating actively in a leadership role in really making this happen. And we're hopeful that the world is changing. We're going to start dealing with these situations in a much, much more serious way, particularly since there's this huge wave, it's a tsunami of displacement impacts where landlords are just routinely destroying buildings. And I distributed a little story about one of the cases we've had, but it's a constant case. We're getting them all over the time where landlords are taking extreme actions to get the tenants out to vacate their buildings, especially in Williamsburg, which is the center of our action. It's commonplace and sickening. And as the Borough President said, there's only been one arrest. And there's got to be a perp walk with as many of these as goes on. They all have to be held responsible for this stuff, and it's got to stop. So it's a war. But I think we can win the war, especially with the help of such extraordinary people like the Borough President. So we want to thank you all and our partners in these struggles, all the community organizations and the nonprofit groups that are tenant organized that are working, because we too are the cops here to make this happen, but we have to take a hard line on it. We cannot let this continue. Thank you.
Any other applicants?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Nehemiah Bay, and I'm an organizer advocate for Neighbors Helping Neighbors in Sunset Park, a program at Fifth Avenue Committee. It's very important, and we appreciate the commitment on behalf of Norman Siegel and the Borough President to go after these landlords that do these things to displace folks. It's very important, especially with the rent laws being renewed, that these things be addressed. Brooklyn has seen gentrification at a widespread level. Sunset Park, geographically being located between Park Slope and Bay Ridge, is kind of like the final frontier. And what's going on in Sunset Park is really scary for folks that have been living there and raising families, 2 and 3 generations of families in the apartments, the only places that they know is home. The harassment, the constructive evictions, the threats of immigration, the threats of ACS, these are the things that landlords do to scare people. And because our community is highly immigrant and people are very afraid, they don't speak the language, so a lot of things don't translate, and they're very afraid of what's going to happen to them. And they need to know that not only are we supporting them as organizers, advocates, and service providers, but that the politicians, the electeds, the people that they vote for, that they put their trust in the city government and state government, will also support them. So again, we want to thank you, Borough President. We want to thank Norman Siegel, all the work that's being done with the coalitions, the groups around the city that are working on this issue, and moving forward, we really want the support, and it's very important as the rent laws are being up for renewal, that certain things have to be addressed. At the foundation of the renewal and strengthening of the rent laws, vacancy decontrol is one of the things that really push this harassment. It really pushes this harassment. So we need to, at the foundation, at least raise the threshold. Landlords have very creative ways to get to that $2,500 threshold, preferential rent, MCI increases. And we need vacancy decontrol to be repealed or modified. We need that threshold to be higher. Major capital improvement costs. When a landlord does a building-wide improvement, he can pass that cost on to the tenants. Okay, fine. However, the tenants pay this charge in perpetuity. So when the roof is paid for, the boiler is paid for, the tenant continues to pay this upcharge, and that's just not fair. Preferential rent, right? All these different things that happen push landlords to harass folks, push landlords to get people out of their homes, and we need New Yorkers, poor, middle class, working class New Yorkers, to have a place they call home. So again, we appreciate the work that's being done by our electeds, and we're going to continue to work and fight in the coalitions that we work in. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Clara Perez Joseph. I'm with the Fifth Avenue Committee, Inquilinos Unidos, Tenants United. These stories of harassment are true and they are widespread. Now it's all over the paper because of a lot of organizations making a lot of noise and protests. But I used to tell one of my elected officials several years ago, if you don't stop this, when the demographics change, you're not going to be in office either, because they're going to put up their own candidates and you won't have a job. And I was very proud last Wednesday, we had a sit-in, civil disobedience in Albany in front of the governor's office, in order to let them know that we want the rent stabilization law, which expires this month, to be renewed and also strengthened. Because as Nehemiah was saying about the vacancy decontrol, I have my neighbor next door. He offered 3 tenants peanuts to move, and he did full demolition for 3 apartments with the other tenants living there. And this morning I had to threaten one of the workers with 311 and the police because they were drilling at 7 o'clock in the morning. And they do that also on Saturdays. Now there are other forms of harassment. My personal experience, I'm 35 years in a rent-stabilized apartment, put all my 3 children through college because I didn't have to worry about their stability. It's not just about the rent being okay, but the stability. And I was able to do that because I had a rent-stabilized apartment. There's a lot of clauses in the rent-stabilized law that some of them we already started to lose. Tomorrow, we're going back to Albany again to send a message that we need this law renewed and strengthened. And that is the reason why they're getting, the landlords are getting a reward if they vacate an apartment, because they can raise the rent a very large percentage. And that's an incentive for them to harass tenants. There are some harassments which are a little bit more subtle. In my personal case, I have a son that's disabled, and my landlord took me to court and falsely accused the dog, my dog, of biting the super. Well, my dog had 2 licenses, regular license and a special license as a therapy dog. So my landlord figured, well, I can't get rid of the dog, so I'll move. That case, I won. Another case, there was a bed bug outbreak, and I was one of the only tenants that accepted the extermination. It was $700. I was going to be evicted because I wouldn't pay it as added rent. Again, they lost. And the last thing they did was not allow me to have DirecTV or cable or anything like that, while all the other tenants had it. Why? I'm a senior citizen. They're discriminating against senior citizens because they have SCREE. They cannot raise the rent. There's no profit there. I have succession rights for my son, who's disabled, so eventually he will have DRE, and they won't be able to raise the rent there. So this attack was on a disabled tenant and on a senior citizen, and discrimination because of low income. The supers are being told now not to rent to minorities, to tell them that there are no apartments. I've asked several supers in my neighborhood, and those are their instructions. We have to really, really fight, and we still have some time, to ask the governor, because the state senate does not want to renew this law, almost all the state senators, but we have the support of the assembly. We have to try to get these laws renewed, because I'm speaking for, and I dare say it, for 2.3 million that will be without apartments if this law is not renewed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And we want to announce that we will also, we're sponsoring a bus for the protest in Albany as well. We want to send a very strong message to our state legislators that we must repeal vacancy decontrol. We must go after those clear indicators that allow rents to slowly increase over time, and Albany holds the key to ensure that this does not take place. The governor must lead this fight. He cannot silently stand by and allow this to continue to happen. When he wants things done, he gets them done. Now it's time to get this done. So we'll open the floor up to any questions at this time. Yes.
I just want to add one short thing. I am thrilled, I am ecstatic that our borough president and Norman Siegel are doing this, because there is a provision under rent stabilization to put a harassment claim. But those claims take almost about 2 years to be investigated and get a decision. And by that time, you know, we'll be out. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing that our borough president is doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
What that is, that's Article 7A of the Real Property Actions and Proceedings Law. It's another law that is ignored by the world, including the Housing Court. It mandates the appointment of administrators to take buildings away from landlords who have allowed for hazardous conditions to remain in a building for an extensive period of time. And in fact, with lawyers, unfortunately, you need a lawyer sometimes to get welfare. With a lawyer, we've succeeded in getting a lot of 7A administrators appointed. And in the old days, it was routinely the heads of nonprofit community organizations, and the community organizer would work with the administrator and run the building. And the rents could only be used for repair and maintenance of the building. So if the landlord wanted to keep the building, he had to pay the taxes, he had to pay the mortgage, and there'd be no profit involved. Every dollar would be used for repair and maintenance of the building. That's a statutory requirement. And there's over 120 buildings in Williamsburg, Greenpoint alone that are now owned by tenants as low-income co-ops as a result of these struggles. So what it shows is when tenants, Inquilinos Unidos, jamás serán vencidos. When tenants come together with the help of an organizer, and unfortunately with the help of a lawyer also, that they can succeed in defeating these situations. But the problem is that that's 90% of the situations that's not happening. We have more of that, we need to, and more enforcement of the laws to make these things happen. But the housing court has to be more committed to following the law and not be a slave of landlords. And unfortunately, that's part of the problem. But
one of the reasons we're having the town halls, it's all factual based. And when I was the head of legal services in Manhattan, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, in the 70s and 80s, we did this. And in some of the places, it worked very well. Some it was okay, and one or two of them, they did not work. So in order to get this, you need to have a factual basis in order to make the argument that the building is not safe, it's not habitable. And one of the reasons we're having these town hall meetings is for people to come and testify. And then let's assume hypothetically someone in a building, there's 2 or 3 tenants here, we'll go out to the building and have a meeting, have organizers with us, and begin to organize the tenants. It puts the landlords on notice. If the landlords understands that there's a serious, effective, institutionalized campaign to address these issues, maybe some of these practices will stop. But most likely they won't stop, and therefore we'll have to take legal action, and that's what we're planning to do. Excuse me?
Article 7A. Yeah.
real property.
And then a third of the tenants have to agree that this is what they want, and then there's a court proceeding where tenants would have to go in and testify before a housing court judge as to conditions. So it's, it is a pathway towards, tenant ownership of a building in some cases.
I'd like to speak to that if I could. As an organizer with Northwest Bronx Community Clergy Coalition, I worked with the Urban Justice Center lawyers, Garrett Wright, and we actually won a 7A case. However, it's very difficult because you need 2/3 of the tenants to sign on, one-third of the tenants to sign on, and then the case takes some months. It could take a year. So you have to have a really good organizer, someone who's really committed to stay in the building. You have to have tenants that are really committed, right, and that don't get afraid. And the issue is that one of the things that make it very difficult is that a landlord has, you come in, there are so many violations. So many things are wrong with the building. However, the decision is made 6, 7, 8 months later, and when the improvements could be made. So if the improvements are made, judges are very reluctant to take someone's livelihood away from them. So if the improvements are made, the landlord keeps the building, and then the cycle repeats itself, right? So that's a great tool, but it's a very difficult case to kind of win for a lot of reasons, but it is a great tool.
But I gotta say, the law says it mandates there must be a trial in 5 days after you file the case unless the tenants agree otherwise, and the court must make a decision in 30 days. They ignore that law. The law is what you can get away with, but the law is very clear. If we can get the enforcement of these laws, it would not go through the torture that people have to go through to get these results.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
Chris with the Daily News. Seagull, you mentioned that the governor can act on this if he really wants to. I was wondering, has there been any response from as to the renewal of the law and any progress?
Well, the governor did an op-ed piece in the Daily News on Saturday, And he seems, in my opinion, to be saying the right things finally, but it's a week from today, and it's getting too close. And one would have thought that Andrew Cuomo would have been much more visible and vocal in empathizing with tenants, especially low-income tenants. And from my opinion, he still needs to do a lot of work in the next 7 days, because if the things that we're advocating are not done, we will remember that he was missing in action.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
At the civil disobedience, he's in by Madison